Good morning, everybody, to this session at the conference on EU international cooperation and procedural interoperability in wildfire management. I'm very happy that we got the chance to host this session today together with my colleague Florian. I'm Claudia Berchtold. I'm a senior scientist at the Fraunhofer Institute for Technological Trend Analysis. I'll guide you through the session this morning, and I have my colleague Florian with me, who will take care of the chat and also interact as much as possible with the audience. I don't know, maybe you want to introduce yourself? Okay, apparently we have the first technical issue here, no problem. You might have the chance to see Florian a little bit later. I'm also very happy that we have two excellent speakers this morning. We have Jean-Paul Monet, who's a senior officer at the fire department Berchtold in France. And we have Peter Goxharaj of the German Technical Relief Organization. I will introduce them in more detail in a tiny bit. But so wait, my slide is stuck. Yeah, this is us. You will see the speakers in a bit. How are we, or why are we actually hosting this session, or how's Fraunhofer INT engaged in the topic of this session? So basically, our institute is involved in all sorts of innovation planning in the civil protection domain, and as you can see on this circle, basically we we support all steps along the innovation planning cycle. So from capability gap analysis and ideation to solution screening of technologies and procedures. We also support the analysis of the innovation environment. So usually we have a deeper look into legal and political settings in which the innovation is supposed to be implemented. And we also develop together with our clients and partners roadmap and implement innovations in the organization settings. So most recently, we have also been involved in a range of projects. One of them is the FIRE project. It's a European networking project in the fire domain, and it also has a wildfire working group. We're involved in the INPREP project, which deals with particularly transboundary civil protection planning and training. And we have recently implemented two projects for DG ECHO. One of them was the peer review program on EU cooperation and civil protection, and also conceptualized a network of European hubs for civil protection and crisis management. And that concept development dealt also with wildfires, or was making use of the example of wildfires. So this is how we came across different aspects in interoperability and wildfire response. And particularly, there are a couple of aspects that I want to mention before we dive into the presentation. So one of the main aspects that we came across in the work that I mentioned is the multinational settings in which the wildfire response resources have to operate, and this diversity increases with the more northern European countries being affected, such as Sweden and Latvia in 2018. And at the same time, the response resources usually are very diverse and very much linked with the local specificities. So the diversity of resources that operate and the context in which they have to operate is increasing. And one of the main recommendations that was made in the concept for a hub on wildfires was, among others, of course, but was harmonization of practices in wildfire response. At the same time, and this is why we have Peter today with us, the INSARAG community, the urban search and rescue community, is dealing with the standardization of procedures for several decades already, and they have developed operational guidelines and a related certification mechanism. So the idea for the session today was basically to get a better understanding what is working well in standardization of procedures in the INSARAG community, and what recommendations or what lessons may be drawn for the wildfire community. So yeah, that's the short introduction actually on why we wanted to have this session today. Our intention was also to get a better understanding on who you are, because it's a bit strange with these formats. We have no idea about the actual audience. So we set up a Mentimeter space. I don't know, some of you who followed the live stream this morning might already have come across this. So what you see here is the link, and you can enter this code below. This you see here. And we would kind of like to ask you to enter your name and affiliation, or simply affiliation, depending on what information you want to share. And then we can share with you again the summary of the information, and we have a better understanding on who's actually here. Okay, I stop sharing my screen now so that Florian can share the results with you. Bear with us for a second, it's the technique. Ah, there we go. Okay. That's interesting. Okay, thank you very much. Then we move on to the next slide. Yeah, just a second. Okay, and then we have one additional question. So not to see only who's here, but also to get an understanding on what is your civil protection context. Like, are you a practitioner? Are you a researcher? Or what is your what is your interest in the session? So it's, again, you can use the link here and the same code, and it will present you different question. Habe ich. Okay, we have so far only one response. Ah, there we go. Great. Okay, so we have a couple of people from the research community, from the innovation community, and also from strategic planning. That's okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So we have an idea on who's actually listening to us, and now I'm happy to present the first speaker. which is Jean-Paul Monet. Jean-Paul is a senior officer employed at the French Fire Department Bouches-du-Rhône, and he's has more than 30 years of work experience and has commanded a large number of incidents, of course. He wrote several papers also on interoperability aspects, among others. He's also a expert evaluator for the European Commission for the Horizon 2020, among others. And he was also an incident commander in the French Modex in 2018. In the same year, he went with a module to Sweden, where he was a team leader for the French ground detachment. So Jean-Paul will start with his presentation. So I stop sharing my screen. I'm very happy to have you here, Jean-Paul. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claudia. Good morning, everybody. Do you hear me correctly? Yes, okay. So I try to share my screen. There is always some, so that I hope it works. At first, I want to precise that this paper has been written with
Jean-Paul, sorry, I can't see your screen. Can you just double check?
Okay, I try again.
Yes, very good. And
it works.
Still, you have to go to the presentation mode. Yes, excellent.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, good. So I have to precise that this presentation is done in the context of a series of papers about command and control issues toward interoperability. Several colleagues from Italy, Spain, Greece, and Portugal also are co-authors of the last paper we issued this spring. I want to draw up three ways, three pillars, let's say, to improve civil protection in Europe. Of course, at first, we have the big issue, the big concern of technical standards. You know that in civil protection, in this framework, there is quite no technical standards. The picture demonstrated when we work abroad, we have to build or to have several special couplings for all hoses, and the hoses diameter is not the same as well. And that's everywhere, that's the same for the trucks, for the airplanes, and there is quite no standards. But on another hand, there is of course, interoperability is suffering from this lack of standards, but it doesn't, it's not so bad. I mean that the incident commander in the whole countries are used to deal with capabilities instead of standards. So if the material and the practices are not standardized, incident commanders are able to give an assignment and to give a mission to an incoming European module. Because when you have a module, a European module, you know what this module is able to do. And also there is the question, the issue of the practices, what it's frequent to read standardized operational practices or standardized technical practices or standardized command and control practices. So the second pillar is to share and to benchmark the best practices. Instead of harmonizing or giving some standards, it's very good that countries and civil protection can do some workshops, some conference, some trials to share the best practices. And that's the two first pillars I wanted to mention, but that's not the focus, the aim of my paper. My aim is more on the third pillar. third pillar is what I call command and control practices. It's the question of harmonizing at least a little bit the command and control systems in Europe. Uh, we had these study cases in Sweden, 2018, that was very interesting to see how Sweden was organized and how was it possible to incoming modules to be integrated with the best efficiency. And I will come back to on this topic, but you will see it's very interesting. It's a very interesting study case. What is the situation nowadays? Nowadays, we have the very well-known American system, which is called ICS, which is a short, a very wide system built in the 80s, at first for wildfires, but now extended to all hazards. That's an interesting model, a very interesting model at first because it was primarily defined for wildfires and then extended to all hazards. I think that that's a good model. And this chart is a little bit complicated, maybe, but everybody knows that. And it's at least inspiring for Europe. But it's not totally suitable to Europe, on my feeling, because American model is a little bit different as our model in Europe. Even if this ICS is now very largely used in USA, of course, in Canada, in Australia as well. And it's interesting to see that in Australia, small changes have been done to adapt the system to the country, and also South Africa and some countries of Asia too. So you see that it's a very important system, and it's impossible to Europe to ignore that. For example, last year in Australia, Europe was very had big difficulties to give its help to Australia because Australia was using ICS and European people were not supposed to know this system. Second system is also very well known. I will let the floor, of course, to my colleague to better explain the UN coordination framework established many years ago for search and rescue. And it's very, if I want to say only a sentence to that, it's a very humanitarian inspired system with many coordination cells and with a wish to be efficient without disturbing the sovereignties. That's my feeling. So it explains why we have so much coordinations bodies in this chart. Then I could also mention NATO. My feeling is that NATO is not dedicated and not built for civil protection, but sometimes we see NATO on the ground. That's the basic chart, and if you have a quick look, you can see that it's very close to ICS, or ICS is close to this NATO chart. But also, I go back to my study case in Sweden. That was interesting to see what Sweden did in Berchtold. That was the biggest fire of Sweden. They organized a NATO framework command and control system with many sections in the incident command post, which was a school. It was located in a school, and they organize it in 8 functions under the order of an incident commander. That was interesting. That was very surprising, of course, because when I went in Sweden, I was not imagining that I will be involved in a NATO command and control framework. But fortunately, I was instructed to it, and it was very easy because because of the same argument I gave previously. The incident commanders were used to deal with heterogeneous modules, but with skills and capabilities. So we were very quickly and very efficiently involved in the operation section and on the fire itself. So that is quite interesting to see that even if NATO is usually dedicated to military operations, it's possible to fight in some operations. And of course, each country has its own framework of command and with specificities and some standards. And it's important to take it in account, of course, because in Europe, we have 32 participant states, and each country is unique. And of course, there is the history in each command and control system. For example, here is a French system. You can see it's not so far from the others. You have an incident commander and some sectors and an incident command post as well. So it was for us quite interesting to compare it and to give some proposal. In 2018, in March, we went in Brussels and say it's possible to install or to organize a European command system. That was the first opinion paper, but quickly the real cases of Modex at first, then Sweden, allowed me to test and to enlarge my ideas about it and to do some other paper. And of course, what was very fruitful was the tender organized by DG ECO. DG ECO organized a tender called Civil Protection Hub for Crisis Management. It was focused on wildfire at the beginning, but always with a large view. So this project allowed us to do an experimental training in January this year, and some other ones, to be honest, in the end of 2019, and that built a kind of an idea, and I could join other co-authors to give this proposal in 2020. So what is, I don't want to be too long, of course, but this proposal is based on the identification of a common backbone. The common backbone is what is possible to find in all the systems, and that could be the aim, the backbone of a future European command and control system. Everywhere you have an incident commander. The incident commander is usually dealing at strategical level with policymakers. Everywhere, quite everywhere, there is a safety officer and some sectors. It's a division of the incident, of the catastrophe, if it's needed. So there is also an incident command post, and there is big heterogeneity in the staffing of the incident command post. So we decided that everywhere we could find a head of incident command post, an officer managing all this stuff, and of course an operations section, planning section, which is focused on organizing the future, and a resources section, which is to deal with material. And of course, regarding to the countries, many others function can be added, such as intelligence section, such as, for example, security section, safety section instead of safety officer. So there are many configurations, but the backbone is identified, is here. So the idea is that that could be taught at European level by EU CPM system mechanism, and of course to be implemented and described by some guidances to be issued by DG ECO, of course. And my idea, our idea, is that the training program, the UCPN training program, could integrate these ideas, especially in the OPM course, which could be little bit enlarged to teach the officers how to deal with an operation function, how to deal with the logistic function, how to deal with the planning function. That could be integrated very easily in the framework existing training program. As well, it could be interesting to deal and to instruct some incident commanders not to be incident commander, because if they are attending to a European course, they are supposed to be already incident commander in their own countries, but how to manage, how to deal, how to be integrated in a broad incident command post, everything that could be taught in the European context. And on another hand, on the right of the screen, you can see the technical expert and the technical workshops. Of course, Europe has to organize and to teach maybe some workshops to share and benchmark best practices. So that could be valuable, maybe to organize it at first on a regional scale, to deal with floods, to wildfire, CBRNE, and to share the practices and to go slowly with a standardization, to go slowly toward an harmonization of the practices, and why not of the material? Why not? I want to say that, of course, EUCPM program organizes Modex. So it has to be kept because it's very interesting to train and exercise on the field. But I would say that it begins to be integrated. It has to be stopped, to be trained, to be exercised in a fictive country. That's not real exercising. Exercising has to be in a country, and we have to respect the organization, the sovereignty, and the command and control framework of this country. And all the focus or the interest of the exercise is to see or foresee how to deal with catastrophe in this country, integrating several models and giving small changes to the national command and control framework to let this system being able to admit and integrate modules coming from all the Europe. So that's fundamental that these ideas have to be integrated fully in the preparedness of the DG ECHO. To conclude, maybe I'm a little bit long. Of course, the idea is to install a kind of soft power, teaching some realities at European level on civil protection coordination. This idea of a soft power is to allow the officers coming in another country to identify very quickly the national command and control system and to help eventually this system if they are integrated in the incident command post as we were in Sweden. So it's possible to increase the efficiency and the interoperability of our modules in Europe and outside as well, to be better and to give a better response for our citizens. Of course, the respect of the sovereignty is fundamental because there are many reluctancy of the countries when you say we will speak about command and control system. Everybody thinks that Europe will take the command in the countries. That's not the case. That's only to have a kind of harmonization to be more efficient. And of course, it is possible to monitor and evaluate the quality of the interoperability. We have some works with Fraunhofer on it. And that could be interesting to have at first analysis, first study of all European command and control system, and then to monitor how to deal in the future, of course, and to monitor the quality of interoperability. And the idea is when we do that, if we do that, if we teach kind of harmonization or some knowledge to our officers, we will probably and progressively build this dreamed European command and control system. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Thank you very much for the kind presentation. You're right on time. So maybe just to summarize, and please correct me if I mistake anything. There are a couple of main aspects from your point of view. So the first one is to differentiate between the command and control structures and the technical practices, and to organize the harmonization within these two strands. The second one would be to identify commonalities, to identify differences, but for sure to expand training on these aspects eventually under the UCPM program, and to also have a closer look at interoperability aspects and to also evaluate them. I would now like to hand over to Florian to see if there are pressing questions from the audience, anything that you would like to address or clarify regarding Jean-Paul's presentation.
Hello, everyone. At the moment, we don't have any questions. So, dear audience, if you have any questions for your understanding or as follow-up questions, just hit the chat and we will discuss here. Or if there aren't any questions right now, you can collect them and ask after our second speaker. So I just give the audience some seconds. Maybe there are some questions. Okay, at the moment we don't have any questions so far. So, but dear audience, if you are interested in asking some questions, we have our speakers here available, and we can discuss after the second talk then.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to add one sentence, which is kind of introduction for Peter. The big issue of my paper is it useful to standardize, or is it too late?
Okay, that's we'll figure out in a bit. And thank you, Jean-Paul, for this handover actually, because I'm now curious to see what Peter is going to present. Peter Goxharaj is a Senior Program Officer for Urban Search and Rescue at the THW headquarters in Bonn, Germany. And his background is public administration, but after serving the German army, he is working since 1992 in the civil protection context and started working for THW in the same year. And he's now working on INSARAG aspects and is working as a classifier since 2001. He's a member of the INSARAG training working group, and he's a mentor for national accreditation processes for several countries. I'm sure he will give us an overview of this in a bit. And he has been part of more than 40 missions as head of mission, as assessment or administration expert, among others in Albania, Bosnia, Sierra Leone, Sri Lanka, and other countries. So Peter, thank you very much for being here with us today. And I don't want to take more of the time and give the floor to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, my presentation is somehow dense and compact because I'm speaking about something that, if we are honest, most governments don't like, because standardization means I don't have a single position anymore. I don't have power anymore to be the one who can do the job and the others cannot do this job. If we standardize, we enable everybody to join. And the biggest advantage is it is not for us, it is for the victims. It is the benefits for those we are working for come out of standardization in a much higher amount than before. Actually, the presentation is not on, Claudia, I don't know why.
I'm sorry, I have to share your presentation. I forgot about it for a second. So there we go.
Thank
now
you.
It should be there, right?
Yes, it is
yes,
there.
Okay, sorry.
So INSARAG methodology, standardization versus chaos. Why did I choose that? And we will see if we go to the next slide that there is a meaning why the people had to develop a methodology. If we go back into history, we had two fatal earthquakes. One was in '85 in Mexico, and the other one was in 1988 in Armenia. And both quakes were really strong quakes. And in this event, some countries, and that were the later founding members of INSARAG, which were Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, decided actually that we have to do something. And that was the core of what later becomes INSARAG. INSARAG is now, since 2002, a legal body of United Nations and a part of OCHA. And that gives us, again, the link to the coordination. So the International Search and Rescue Advisory Groups tries, I have to say, to set standards and operating procedures for urban search and rescue. And why is this so important? Something that is not in the PowerPoint. When it comes to the rescue, the most expensive rescue in the world is space rescue. Second expensive is deep sea submarine rescue. And then comes already urban search and rescue. And we're speaking about an enormous amount of money. For example, if my team goes out, I need at least a Boeing 757. I will put the 80 people in, the 20 tons of equipment, we will fly out. And all this is at least minimum 350,000 euros. And that's a lot of money. And for this money, our customer, as we say in INSARAG, should get the best result. Next slide, please. So what was wrong in Mexico and Armenia? Wrong was everything. Teams arrived which never proper trained. Yeah, very often they had nearly no or completely inadequate equipment. They had no real base of operation where they could sleep and eat. And they don't even had food with them. And many teams arrived simply too late. Because in earthquakes, we only have 120 hours, and then the possible survival rate goes very close to zero. So we needed coordination. There was no proper coordination on all levels in those two events. The rescue rate was very, very low compared to today. Most teams were a burden to the country because, well, they had no heating. When we worked in Armenia in '88, it was winter. Yeah, it was minus 10 degrees. So a very difficult situation. No self-sufficiency, not enough water, not enough food, not enough medicine for the medical component, if there was a medical component. And very often search teams arrived, and it's still today, teams with dogs that bring hope and then the deepest sorrow in the world, because if they detect somebody, who's going to dig this person out if there's no rescue stuff? So INSARAG was really needed, trying to bring a little bit more order in all this chaos. Next slide, please. So we are saying at INSARAG that we try to save lives by standards, like OCHA is saying we try to save lives by coordination. So urban search and rescue is happening in a very chaotic phase. Yeah? Very often the local government is still not able to decide, do I really need foreign teams? And this actually, till today, is not a question. you will need teams if you have a major earthquake, because you never have enough person to work in the field. So there must be something to be done. And one of the points of INSARAG is we are also following the slogan of United Nations, as local as possible. So I will speak very soon about the old days when the famous rescue teams came from all over the world. This is something like dinosaurs. This is going to dismiss, because it is much better if we have solid action on the ground inside the country, which does not need the foreigners. So for the standards, we say, well, we need at least to define the equipment. INSARAG is not using brands. INSARAG is not saying you must have this. We are giving recommendation and saying this should be equipment that you have. And if you buy equipment, it is a tough job. Buy the best you can afford. The teams must be able to deploy rapidly, and that means within 10 hours after activation, the plane should take off. 10 hours sounds quite long, but if we speak about 100 people coming more or less from half of Germany and 20 tons of equipment to be brought through the customs into a plane, and by the way, we need a plane. First of all, this we have to hire. So there's a big amount of processes behind that. The teams now must be completely self-sufficient. That means for 10 days, a heavy team can work completely without any support except of cars and petrol. Because we cannot bring cars in trucks or something like that. And of course, the teams now must have all 5 components. And of course, search is very important. K9 is dogs. Tech is the technical search devices. The rescue comes, the medical part, the logistics, and the management. The most important part, actually, besides search and rescue, is the medics. We use emergency doctors that go into the debris, and their job is to stabilize the victim so that we bring him out safe and we could hopefully hand him over to a local medical service, an ambulance, whatever is available. Next slide, please. So for that, we have guidelines. These guidelines are actually, we always call it our Bible, but of course it is only guidelines. It is just giving a frame, and within the frame, each country, each civil protection agency can actually work according to the budget they have, because INSARAG is never saying you must have a water purification system done by Kirche or something like that. No, we say you must be able to purify water. How you do it, that's your deal. So we are quite open to nearly everybody in the world to join. Every 5 years, based on the lessons learned, we are revising our guidelines and bring out a new edition. And especially we have additional events happening due to things that happen in these 5 years, due to earthquakes where we had a lessons learned. And some of these finally went into the classification of the teams. We have light teams, medium teams, heavy teams. Just to give you an impression, the light team is just jumping over the border. It is neighborhood aid. It is not a team flying 10 hours, from Germany to somewhere in Asia. No, neighborhood aid. The medium team is able to work for 5 days on one side, and the heavy team would be able to work even for 10 days on 2 sides. But still, these team classification, we come later to it, is somehow a burden, because the major task of INSARAG from the very beginning in the late 90s was capacity building. We want to build capacity in those earthquake-prone countries where this capacity is needed every day. Actually, INSARAG is always saying, yes, we have been the blueprint for the EMT development. Yes, that is true. Dr. Ian Norton from WHO studied the guidelines and invented, let's say, more or less the own standards for medical teams, which also have a classification system. We will talk about classification because it is on one hand needed, On the other hand, it could be very difficult. Please, next slide. So our methodology goes from a coherent system. If you see, we start with the first responders. And even for those first responders that are not the firefighters, not the police, not the civil defense, we have a standardized training, a training actually that THW did for Iraq, where we train trainers to do training with the local village people. And the people learn, we will speak about that, how to deal after an earthquake with the most primitive tools you can get to rescue people. So we want the nations who join INSARAG to be part of this coherent system. Actually, that is a dream, because we have to speak about politics, we have to speak about many other things. Actually, it is very expensive to do a coherent system. So many teams decide, well, okay, it is good enough if we just did the classification. And that is not the best way, actually. Next slide, please. So when we come to the external classification, as it is called in INSARAG, it is a peer process. Yeah, classifiers, very experienced people who are in the business for 20 years, will be selected from all over the world to have different viewpoints, of course, yeah, because even if we all are standardized, there are some differences. And there's a full test of all the functions, from mobilization through custom procedures, arrival in the foreign countries, and 36 full-hour field exercise. This ever first time invention, yeah, was very good in the beginning, but what was coming up as a peer-to-peer process became a political nightmare when those peers, those classifiers, decided the team is not ready yet. It failed. It happened in 2011, and it was a major problem because, well, I would like to say it's like the reunification of Germany. Yeah, the wall was falling down and nobody was prepared. Same was when this happened. The political pressure was very rough, and so INSARAG was trying to think about what can we do in the future to avoid this. We have now a strong mentor system. I will also speak about that, but still the question is, as I said, many teams exist without the coherent system. And the question now is, how many teams do we really need? Next slide, please. So, as you can see here, we have, alone in Africa, Europe, Middle East, the region of INSARAG with the most teams, we have 41 teams classified. In Americas, especially Latin America, the Caribbean, think of Haiti earthquake, we just have 4 teams. And in Asia Pacific, my goodness, think about the ring of fire going through Asia. Yeah? We just have 11 teams. And this is something that should not be. Yeah? It should not be that teams, let's take my own team from Germany. We don't have something in Germany that we really could call an earthquake. Yeah? So we are not an earthquake-prone country, but we have a governmental team plus 2 NGOs also that could go out worldwide to work in such a disaster. So that should not be. And so INSARAG is setting a focus now on the question, how can we try to build up more capacity where it is needed and try, well, to get rid of some of these capacity in Africa, Europe, Middle East that is not needed there because not a real earthquake. Just for example, when you think of the country in Africa, Europe that has the highest risk on earthquakes, that is Turkey. The Turkish government has a master plan, and in this master plan, it is foreseen that within 24 hours, the government of Turkey will mobilize 50,000 skilled persons. It will be EMTs, yeah, local EMTs. It will be classified teams by INSARAG. It will be NGOs, it will be army teams, and so on. So just think about it. If there is the local government sending 50,000 people, yeah, how many foreigners will you really need after 24 hours? So Turkey was going the right way. Many other countries still have to work on that. Next slide, please. So we come to the point, yeah, the local teams, the classified teams, there's a big kind of, I will not call it war, but it's also not a competition. It is something that is completely wrong, because the understanding should be that the most important part is the first responders, those teams who are there in the first 24 hours. Just to give you an example, the earth is shaking. Let's take like 2001, India, Goxharaj. So it takes at least 4 hours, yeah, to have a political will. Will Germany send the government team? So then we have 10 hours for activation. And then we have at least 8 hours flight time. We arrive nearly 24 hours after the quake. In the meantime, the local teams, the local first responders will save more people. And as you say, see, I have written that over there. When the earthquake happened in Nepal, the 10 light teams from the Indian army that arrived in the first hours after the quake rescued more persons alive than all the 47 international teams that follows. I mean, this is such a clear signal that something is wrong. Yes, we do need international teams to fly over the world. They should be standardized. But if we make a real lessons learned, if we really compare risk, then we find out it is less than 50 cities, because we are speaking about urban search and rescue. We are not speaking about rural or search and rescue. It is for the big cities with the concrete towers, yeah, the high-rise buildings. So it's less than 50 cities, and we already have 56 teams, and there's still a queue for teams to be classified. So something is terribly wrong, and INSARAG is trying to correct it. Next slide, please. So international light teams. Before these teams were endorsed by the steering committee of INSARAG, light teams only existed inside the country. But due to Nepal, the idea came up that if we look at the world, we find many countries with strong quakes surrounded by other countries also having quakes. So the idea is that there in the future will be classified teams who virtually can jump over the border by taking a helicopter, maybe even drive over the border. A typical example is, for instance, Israel. I'm the mentor for the Israel Light Team, and this team could easily go by helicopter over to Cyprus if there's an earthquake, and Cyprus is an earthquake zone, even if it is one of the big holiday islands in Europe. They could even go by car, by truck, over the border to Jordan, having a very significant earthquake risk. So these light teams, they are really, really important. And as you see, I'm mentioning the Caribbean, the Caucasus, the Mediterranean. There, strategically, it makes a lot of sense. Also Latin America, because Latin America is having serious budget problems, is having serious problems in, well, building up strong, heavy teams. So they all have light teams. If they classify the light teams that easily within 1 hour would go, for example, from Uruguay to Chile, that's something that is really good. The international light teams, they are very light. They have just 20 persons, 3 metric tons of equipment, designed really to be there as quick as possible. Next slide, please. So standardization and coordination. Here you see the idea how it should be. It's always an idea, because what we face in reality, and this happened again in the Beirut quake, teams arrive who are not aware of this coordination structure. They are not trained in this coordination. And then suddenly somebody is there trying to address himself in a language. Let's take Greece, yeah. But you should speak English. So a big problem. There is a very good system to coordinate, but in most of the quakes, we have the problem that coordination is hampered by too many teams, not aware of the structure, how to coordinate, not aware of the fact that they need to read and write and understand English fluently. Next slide, please. So back to basics. Actually, what we try to do is that we say, well, okay, as local as possible, we will do it and we will concentrate on that. Actually, at the moment, the first responder training is something THW Germany is promoting very strong. As I said, we did it in Iraq. We even did the next step. We donated a mobile school, a four-wheel truck that could go into the mountains, into the villages, and then the people can train the villages in the mountains. We will do the same actually in Georgia next year when hopefully COVID is done. Because FRT is strengthening the local resilience. And you would be amazed how much work you can do if you just have a little bit knowledge on statics, if you have a crowbar, if you have a hammer, a scissor. It's a fantastic thing and it's very cheap, and we like to do it everywhere simply because it is saving lives. Our next plan is to do sessions in south of Lebanon. Then the national accreditation process. The national accreditation process is the first step towards a quality level, because if I have, as a government, a local structure accredited and saying, well, this is a unified standard that everybody, even NGOs, have to follow, then I can be very sure that the work these teams are doing is more efficient, if it is in the own country or if it is even a neighboring aid. And finally, because Jean-Paul was speaking about it, we have the earthquake response exercise, the ERI, which is an annual exercise that we do in the 3 regions of INSARAG, which is the Americas, Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. So very short in basics, you see 2 pictures. It's the top picture is the Iraqi colleagues who did the training in our training center. And the other photo you see is from China, because the government of China had a very different approach, because they said, well, okay, anyhow, we are much too big to really think about first responder training. But we do have a major problem, and that problem is called the Tibetan Plateau. And when you think of the major quakes happening in China, they are more or less close or on the Tibetan Plateau. The lowest point is the airport for the city of Chi, which is at 3,700 meters. The plateau is even 400 meters higher. That means if there's a quake, nobody can come because you get high altitude illness. So most of the training we did was for the Tibetan Plateau, where the trainers then went out, because they are born and living there, to train their own people, because they have even more hours to wait for help because of the high altitude illness. And this is not only a problem for China. There's, for example, in Peru, one of the quick rising cities due to the gold rush happening in the mountains of Peru is now reaching 50,000 people in over 4,600 meters. And it is a quake zone. These people also will need a first responder training. Otherwise, there's a risk that everybody dies in a quake. Next slide, please. So the national accreditation process, you see some pictures from Turkey. The Turkish government decided already in 2017 to go through this process, because, as I said, if I have a master plan as a government, 50,000 people in 24 hours, there is a need for standardization. There's a need for accreditation just to make sure that these huge amount of rescuers can work together. National accreditation at the moment is only done in Chile, in France, and in Turkey. So you will ask yourself, why is it done in France? For many, many reasons. First of all, France is not only France in Europe. France is having a lot of territories outside Europe, which are also country of France, and they need a system, to make sure that whatever happens, that the people can work together. So they are implementing the national accreditation quite successfully. The third team is going to do their national accreditation this winter, and then other teams will follow. So there are two kinds of national accreditation, and those teams who really say, well, we are not planning to go internationally, stay with the national accreditation. And those who are planning to say, well, okay, we later will have an international team, they apply already at INSARAG and say, well, we would like to have some foreign observers for our process, just to make sure that we are on the right way. The next slide, please. So the INSARAG earthquake response exercise, something very, very specific. As we are in Germany, most of you know the LÜKEX exercise, which is the exercise where every 2 years Germany tries to prepare for major disasters. Why are we doing it every 2 years? Yeah, because it is still so much to coordinate, so much to synchronize, to standardize. So INSARAG decided, well, if we do an annual exercise as a tabletop exercise, the aim of this exercise is not to exercise, it is to test the existing city. So Europe is doing a lot with artificial countries, which might make sense if you have a lot of technical things to do in the exercise. But if you do a tabletop exercise, well, yes, you should try to test the process, the standards, the plan of action, and so on. So it is a real exercise for the local government, including EMTs, including the local civil protection, including foreign teams, and of course, if needed and wanted, it is able to observe it, to prepare actually for themselves, to say, well, okay, I would like to have this exercise maybe in 2 years. As it is quite a big event, you can see it's up to 500 participants. And it really, really works. One of the best exercises we had in the past was happening in Malaysia, where we had 480 participants. And there we had one of the typical gaps we identified. Still, we do have a problem in coordination with the EMTs, in coordination with the medical sector, actually locally, because when our doctors from the urban search and rescue teams bring out the victims, what are we going to do with the victim? We cannot put him on the ground and go to the next building. So maybe we have to take care longer than the initial stabilization phase. And still we try to work on these items to find a conclusion where we can be more sufficient. Because even if we are self-sufficient, we only have 2 beds for treatment. And so if we dig out 2 victims, we are already done. Next slide, please. So there are many, many items in INSARAG we are going to work on, and I will be finished with this slide, actually, don't worry. We are trying to enhance the dialogue because something at the moment is wrong, and I just take Europe as the example. When the quake in Iran, in Bam, happened in 2003, we had the problem that there was suddenly somebody from Italy with a European flag and a tent, and he was saying, well, I'm here to coordinate the European teams. Meanwhile, there was already a coordination cell by the United Nations. That was an item that was under discussion for several years. We have now a solution. Years passed and some items seem to be forgotten. At the moment, ASEAN is much more interested in updating and working together than the European Union. What also is done, we are thinking about so-called technical support groups, and these are experts that could be sent everywhere to support the government. And you might say, well, that's not something special. Yes, it is a bit special because these people are really politically also trained, because we speak about national accreditation, about laws, we speak about budget for a couple of years that is needed. So it's a very sensitive item to discuss, and so these people have to be selected carefully. We also promote flexible response, like in the quake, where we normally do only urban search and rescue. We still have a team with experts, and these experts could be used for other cases. Our doctors could support a local field hospital, or our logisticians could work at the airport. This concept we call flexible response is now being developed. We will soon have a handbook for it, so that there are opportunities for local governments, even if the urban search and rescue phase is gone. Same is in supporting the local emergency management authority with the engineers for the structural assessment. And that is really an item that is very, very difficult for most governments. Yeah. I have to make sure, will these buildings survive the next 20, 30 aftershocks? I need a lot of engineers to test that. And so this is a typical job that we could do. On the other hand, in the Albania quake, where a lot of foreign engineers did it, we have the situation that there are people now in jail for slaughter accused because of bad building standards. This is the other side of the medal. So some of the engineers are saying, no, this is for me a too risky job. I don't like this idea. But finally, the most important part, as we are here now in the Cross and Crescent family, intensifying the exchange between the INSARAG medical working group, WHO, and the EMTs, because this is in most exercises the critical point. How can we have a better support for the victim? And I mean, we are speaking about victims we are digging out with crush syndrome, where we maybe have to do field amputations and stuff like that. So it is a quite high level of advanced life support that we have to do. But we are not in the position to go there into the debris and to say, well, we are here really like a field hospital. So we need to cooperate, and we want to cooperate, of course, with the EMTs. So it's just a short overview. The topic itself offers a lot of things, but the major item is, yes, we can say there is a huge benefit from standardization. If possible, start as early as possible and try to have the coherent system, to start at the local level before thinking of the glorious foreign team going outside to help the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter, very much for this interesting presentation. That was very insightful, and I would also like in a bit to give the floor back to Jean-Paul to see what he thinks whether the standardization activities for the wildfire community could be useful or not. But there have been some questions and remarks in the chat, so I hand over to Florian to address these questions to you.
Yes, thank you. As I'm the moderator for the chat, we have some questions and some remarks. I will go through them and address them to you, Peter and Jean-Paul. So partly it was already addressed in the chat as well, but I would open it for the floor for the whole audience as well. So first of all, there was the question from Mr. Bloch. Do you think there's room to strengthen partnership between INSARAG and the UCPM? So maybe to you both.
Well, maybe I will start. It is needed because, again, just take the example of Europe. In Europe, we do have modules, and these modules were built up for urban search and rescue because Europe wanted it according to the INSARAG guidelines. So we already have a basic level. Yeah, a team could only become a module if they follow the INSARAG guidelines. But still, we do have a lot of teams which are not following the guidelines, which need at least support. The most terrifying situation, actually, just to give an example, we have soon member states, candidates. One is Albania. Albania had recently the quake, and they were very lucky. It was off season, so most of the hotels that were gone on the coastal region were empty. But actually, the capital itself, Tirana, is a high-risk earthquake zone. The last quake happened in 1936. At that time, the bell tower of the church and the minaret of the mosque were the highest building. Now they have 24 buildings. Same situation, Bosnia, same situation in Macedonia. So next to Europe, we have a lot of high-risk zones where we need to work together to build up as soon as possible capacity. INSARAG maybe with the technical items, the European Union with fair projects or whatsoever, to build up resilience, because these countries need resilience. And finally, yes, Europe is taking part in the meetings, so at least we have a good cooperation. Also, teams can take part in Modex exercises, but still there's much more possible. Over.
Yeah, and Jean-Paul Monet, you already had an answer in the chat. Maybe you can elaborate on this?
Yes, of course. INSARAG history is very inspiring for Europe. Certification, standardization, harmonization capabilities. But I'm afraid that a certification process could be very long on other risks, because of course the standard, INSARAG standard, is taken in account for search and rescue modules at EUCPM. But on the other risks, it's probably, I'm afraid it's too late, and the process would be too long to have a real standardization of the modules. But maybe it's possible to be inspired by this, what I call INSARAG spirit, to install more precisely the capabilities or the material who are wished to be in a model. And of course, it also points the question of the training and the human capabilities in the modules. But you see that's a very large question. And I think that in 20 years, Europe did a lot, already did a lot, because with this soft framework of UCPM, with not too much constraints, they achieved to build module all over the participant states and to prove that this concept is efficient, because now with climate change, each year there is a UCPM activation against natural disaster. So my feeling, it's an emergency. It urges to build and to improve again European mechanism. But yes, INSARAG is the good cousin in Geneva to teach how to do. He shows the ways.
And you also added in your reply in the chat that you think that DG ECHO has to take a lead. Could you explain a little bit more on that?
Yes, I think that with the guidance, already existing guidance of UCPM, I think that they are now identified in Europe being the leader of cooperation on civil protection. That was the sense of my sentence. They have to be more and more to develop more and more leadership to be identified by other bodies such as NATO, UN, but UN it's not necessary, but from the participant states themselves. It's easy to be in a meeting in Brussels and to say, no, I don't want to do that. But if 6 months later you have a natural disaster in your country, you will ask for the help, and you will see how the European help is efficient.
Great, thank you. Then there is another question from Frauke Kraas. If you could both maybe elaborate a bit more about possible enhancement with the civil society.
Well, civil society, that's actually an item like grassroots level. It's of course for government teams sometimes a bit difficult because it is not really the task, and the majority of the teams in INSARAG are governmental teams. But anyhow, the need was identified, and so I have to come back to Lebanon. At the moment, we are having talks, and that means THW and the civil protection in Paris with Lebanon, with UNIFIL, the peacekeeping mission, because we want to implement the first responder training over there, just to strengthen civil society. Yeah, they are desperately poor. They have many other problems also, but they all are together in one item they are not aware of, and that is that they had a long time no quake, but they are a high-risk zone, and south of Lebanon really needs to be prepared, because when it happens, we will have a lot of desperate people already in a desperate economic situation, in a very tough political situation about the government and the different influences in Lebanon. So we try to do something like that, but it's also always a bit difficult, because as a government organization, you are not a humanitarian, yeah, because you are government. Yeah. So we don't call us humanitarian aid, we call us technical aid, yeah, or technical relief, because we are working on order of the government, and this automatically leads into a gap to the civil society, because this is not really, let's say, the interest of the governments. Over.
Yeah, Jean-Paul Monet, could you maybe translate it to the specifics of wildfire risk management?
Yes, I saw the question, and of course it's very difficult to deal with civil society, because it's really under the government, and to deal with the citizen. That was a concern of our hub for civil protection. To deal with the citizen is very difficult, because that's my opinion, is that is really sovereignty, to teach the person to be more resilient, and that's not really the main task of European Union, but to focus on wildfire now. Yes, improvement can be done at European level, of course. I see two things, two levels who are already ongoing. First one is to share the best practices, as I mentioned in my paper, how to do it with workshops, trainings and exercises, probably at regional level, as I mentioned, probably some workshops in the south or in the north of Europe or in the west, because now we have many wildfire in the west of Europe, and that's interesting to compare the practices, the material, and how do you deal with that case and this one, and that is already embryo now. It begins, and also another response. I want to give an example to be more precise. For example, the use of fire is now spreading in Europe against fire. I mean, it's a counter fire or tactic fire. How to use the counter burning, as say the Australian, to stop the big fires, and if in evidence when the fire is huge, very big, it's impossible to have enough resources with water. So counter fire is very efficient, but it's a real practice, to be taught and to be known. So it's not simple, and we have to build a specialized team. So now this kind of knowledge is slowly spreading through the foresters and the firemen, and it's really the best practice sharing. And on another hand, we cannot avoid increasing the European resources. And typically, I mentioned a rescue. Rescue is a very, very good idea to have some airplanes or some material who are dedicated, or helicopters who are dedicated to wildfires under the control of European Union, European Commission. And if the disaster strikes, it's possible to mobilize these aircrafts, for example, to the site, to the theater of operations. And of course, that's a very good idea, who's now only beginning. And I guess that's the future. That's the future.
Thank you very much. We have one more question from the chat. Due to time constraints, I would say we talk about this, and then Claudia maybe has one or two questions as well to conclude. So the question from the chat is, Lukas Edbauer asks if the group, or the two speakers especially, have some recommendations on international cooperation and how prevention of forest fires can be enhanced. So not response, but prevention. And if there are major gaps in the interlinkage of response policies and national and international level. So two questions, but
yeah, maybe I jump in quite quick. Yeah, we are trying to have a double use if possible. So we do have modules in THW doing high capacity pumping for floods. Not waiting for the floods, what can we do? So the basic idea was forest fires need technical support for one reason: the water must go into the forest. And so we could use these high capacity pumps, and we did a lot of training together with the French firefighters in this event, yeah, how to support the firefighters just by doing a logistic item, a water pipeline over several kilometers. It's a technical problem simply because due to the pressure, but it's possible, and it's an ongoing process. And I think it's one of the typical examples, yeah, how to cooperate to have the best use. Over.
Jean-Paul, do you have some ideas on that as well?
Yes, of course, we have to be innovation, and has to be in the mind, because we are facing two unprecedented situations. So it means that we have to mobilize maybe some forces who are not used previously. Typically, the THW could be one of them. And I guess that also there is a knowledge who has to travel through Europe, because of course some countries are not used to have wildfires, and they have to learn some things from the south, and reciprocally the wild fuels are not the same in Baltic countries or in Scandinavian. It's also, it could be some interesting lesson learned to have this kind of sharing the teams, because the specificities of the countries allow to use differently the tools and the material. And that is what we discovered in Sweden 2 years ago. For example, it was more easy, much more easy for us to use the counter fire, the counter burning, because the trees were bigger, if I want to be very short.
Thank you. I hand over to Claudia to have some further questions, concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you to everybody, the audience, and also Florian and the speakers, of course. Particularly with this, I would like to revert to an aspect that Peter mentioned in his presentation earlier, and the aspect of the light urban search and rescue teams, and in my understanding, how you try to build more regional, local approaches so that they can help in incidents in a neighboring country. And yeah, building on this, would like to ask Jean-Paul, do you think that this could also be an approach for the wildfire response to build more regional clusters, let's say, particularly also in Northern Europe, let's say, so that there are capacities that can support each other, rather than, or in addition maybe to building on the European level?
I will answer both, because at first, what is, as Peter say, what is more interesting, that's the same for wildfire, is an early mission from cross-border nations. So I know that Scandinavian countries are already organizing this kind of interoperability and inter-cooperation. But also, it's interesting to have the whole involvement of the European participant states, because that's tricky to notice that if you have bad weather conditions in Sweden, it's usually the same in Finland and in Norway. But sometimes, as a paradox, we had in 2018, the weather was very cool in the south, and it enabled Italian, French, and Portuguese people to send airplanes, because they were not fully used in the south. So that's interesting to have that Europe is a large territory from east to west and from north to south, because there is always a place where people can deliver resources to the country which is affected. And also, I will add that when you have a crisis, a big crisis involving Wi-Fi's, it will last a week. So it's not an early mission, an early responder, but two days later, it's not too late. Paradox.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. Yes, unfortunately, time has passed again much faster than I had hoped to pass. So we have almost come to the closing. Yes, we have to come to an end. Is there any final remarks from your side? Anything you would like to add, or close the session with?
Just a word. Our unusual situation with COVID teach us that our societies have to be more resilient in all situations. And I guess I trust in Europe, because I'm an old European now, but I trust in it. And I think that there is really a role to play in this field of civil protection and health.
Thanks, Jean-Paul. Peter?
Yes, it is. It is simply cooperation. Yes, because civil protection is expensive, because we have so many disasters that are possible, and we cannot be prepared for all of them. So if we don't cooperate over the borders, we will have serious gaps in crisis reaction. So have a good connection, have a coordination system, and then it's a better fight against the disaster. Over.
Thank you very much. So with these words, I think we can close the session and take some messages back home and think of how we can further work on these aspects jointly. I would briefly like to hand back over to Florian, because he's redirecting you then. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Thank you very much to our speakers. It was a super interesting session, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you everyone from my side as well. And I'm kindly asked that you redirect or rejoin the live stream of the plenary session. This session here is now officially over, and I'm looking forward to meet you again in the future. So and have a nice new sessions or more sessions during this conference.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.